Key, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Governor, for attending here today. I'm wondering maybe we could just start by, I'll start by asking, how elastic or inelastic you think demand for housing is for any particular Canadian. So regardless of what happens to price, even if it goes through the roof, it's fair to say Canadians still need and want a roof over their head, regardless of price. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, people obviously need shelter, but if they can't afford it, they can't buy it.
Indeed, but the need doesn't go away. And would you say that in this present moment, we're experiencing a serious supply shortage in the Canadian housing market?
We've seen a building supply shortage now for at least a decade. And the supply of housing is not keeping up with the growth in demand, and that is creating a more acute problem.
And would you say that since interest rates have gone up, that housing starts are lower and we're seeing less new housing stock being added in a higher interest rate environment?
Higher interest rates have dampened demand for housing, and in fact, housing market was very overheated. Housing prices were rising extremely rapidly when we had very low interest rates. As we've raised them, housing prices have actually come down. However, higher interest rates means the carrying cost of mortgage is higher, so affordability has not improved.
So we've heard around this table from experts in the financial industry and the housing industry that the housing crisis won't be solved without some significant level of government investment and contribution. Are you inclined to agree with that assessment?
I will say that we've had a building supply issue in housing now for a decade, and I think speaking on behalf of certainly Senior Deputy Governor and I, we are pleased to see the governments on all levels are more focused on this issue. I don't think this is something that any one level of government is going to be able to solve by themselves. It is going to take all levels of government putting their heads together, and ultimately it's the private sector that are going to build most of these houses or apartment buildings, and they certainly need to be at the table as well.
So I guess my question for you is when you talk about the forecast of 2.5% spending increase across government, I mean, from the point of view of understanding inflation, from the point of view of understanding how we can get our housing market to the place where prices are coming down for Canadians that are having access to more affordable housing, does it not make sense to discriminate between kind of spending in general and spending on building new units, whether those are affordable units, social housing units, or whether it's financing that facilitates market housing? Is that not a categorically different kind of spend than general increases in spending with respect to the current inflationary environment that we're living right now?
Well, you're certainly right that when you're looking at government spending and you want to map that from government spending to the implications for inflation, the amount matters, but also what the spending is matters. Different types of spending have different multipliers. Some spending is much more related to demand. Other spending is adding to supply. So the more that the spending is adding to supply and not demand, that will actually help moderate inflation. Yes, I think to the extent that government spending is augmenting the supply, that will have less, that'll be better for inflation than if it's purely increasing demand. So there's a lot of things you can do on housing, and some of them may be more stimulating demand, others may be more stimulating supply.
So where there's more of a direct line between government expenditure and the creation of a unit, as opposed to government putting money out in the economy that could be used to bid up the price of existing housing stock, you would tend to look at that as less likely to cause inflation and maybe even have a salutary effect and help bring inflation down if there were more supply in the housing market. Is that a fair interpretation? Okay. Well, I think it's important because, you know, some of your comments are taken to reflect on fiscal policy despite your best efforts. And I think it's important for Canadians to understand that there are types of government investment that can actually contribute to reducing inflation while solving some important problems, and that not all government spending is equal in that regard. And, you know, that matters a lot for conversations here on Parliament Hill about how much government should be investing in housing. Particularly, I would argue, and this is my views, I'm not expecting you to have an opinion on this as a matter of fiscal policy, but on social and affordable housing, where government investment tends to be more directly tied to the creation of new units than some of the kind of financing facilities that government sometimes puts out for private developers and other things that do ultimately issue in certain kinds of housing, but are often at the higher end of the housing spectrum, which don't really help on the affordability measure. And is it not the case that the cost of housing is one of the biggest current drivers of the inflationary arc? Is that?
It is an important driver of inflation, and as I indicated, the sort of ongoing price increases are one of the things that are making it difficult to get inflation down.
Thank you. And